right. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual monthly social here in Vancouver. That's great, though. I mean, like we're almost there to back to in person. So thank you all for taking the time to be here today. We have an exciting and insightful discussion for tonight. I would like also to let you know that tonight's event will be recorded. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Luis Bezerra. I'm a senior manager at Passive House Canada, certified passive house designer, civil engineer, and I have close to 10 to 11 years of experience in construction. And I'm excited to be joining you all and in this event as your host. So first of all, I just would like to, Passive House Canada acknowledges the ancestral and unceded territory for all the Métis, Inuit, and First Nations people that call this land home. I'm going to start by providing a brief overview of today's event. We'll be inviting our next sponsor, our event sponsor, SIGA, to say a few words, and then we'll have an open discussion for the next 20 minutes to talk about what projects you are working on and you'd like to share with us before we get to our main presentation. Afterwards, we'll welcome our featured speaker. Probably you already know this guy, Chris Higgins from the City of Vancouver. And after Chris's presentation, we'll open the floor for any questions. So if you have any questions during the whole process, you can put on the chat, I'll be monitoring, or you raise your hand and we'll meet yourself, which I believe will be the best way as we're people and we'd like just the interaction, not only myself reading. And I do apologize in advance. English is not my first language. So if I mispronounce one or two words through here and there, please apologize. Before I get started, I would like to make a quick announcement of our annual conference, which will be held in May 25th from the 27th in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. And I'd like to invite you, this is going to be in person, okay? The event is also going to be online. And our annual conference this year will be in the face of climate change. Our goal is to bring together like-minded individuals to incite conversations about how we can work together to create sustainable, future-focused building and communities. We are currently looking to speakers who are passionate and knowledgeable about passive house design and technology and amidst climate change. If you're interested in this opportunity, please fill up our proposal on our website. I'll put the website here in the chat so you can have a look at it. And the deadline for submission is going to be February 25th, 5 p.m. PST. And I would like as well to mention one last thing before I pass on to Danny. Passive House Canada's trades course is going to be back in person. So if you are willing to take this trades course in person, it's going to happen in March 24th, and it's going to be at SIGA's facility. I'll also put the link on the chat as well. Without no further ado, let's get started. I'd like to thank our sponsor, SIGA, for this event. SIGA is a manufacturer, developer, and distributor of air and wind tight products for building construction. They strive for a world of zero energy loss buildings. I will now pass over to Danny Liu, a SIGA representative, to introduce themselves and say a few words. Danny, take it on, my friend. Good to have you here.
Hey everyone, thanks Luis for the quick, nice intro. Again, I'm Danny, the other SIGA guy for Team BC. Some of you might know Andrew. He is my partner in crime, but for me, I'm known as the other tape guy. But yep, super happy and stoked to be able to attend and sort of help out, support the group. I think even this group's even larger than last week potentially, but I'm glad to see more and more people coming up to these types of events. News from us, we are officially having our SIGA grand opening event for our High Performance Construction Training Center. It is on February 24th, Thursday of next week from 12 to 4 p.m. If you have some time and if you're in the area, Quillen, BC, please come out and swing by and say hi. You know, there's going to be foods, drinks, some games, and be a chance to mingle again now that COVID restrictions are opening up. So please, for those who are interested and might have some questions, I will copy and paste the link in the chat box. And yeah, I'd be super stoked to see everyone again, especially now that we're getting the chance to meet more and more in person again. So thanks.
Danny, thank you. Thank you for the brief introduction, and I will be there in the event as well. So as you said, a chance to meet in person, mingle, and actually do some proper networking and meet person in people. I mean, like for myself being here locked down for 2 years already, it's too much. So right now, what I'd like to ask is if anyone would like to take the floor to come and share any kind of projects you're working on right now that you'd like to share. And besides that, at the end, I would like to hear what are you hoping to get out of this event and what you'd like to see on the upcoming ones. If you don't put yourself in a spot, I'm sorry, but I will call it some names. I see some familiar faces here, so I know that some of you are working on Passive House projects, and I'd love to hear from you guys. So does anyone would like to get started, or should I start picking names here though? Let's wait and see. Now I have the silence. Oh, and by the way, if you could and you'd like to put your cameras on, that's also nice. I know a lot of people are already, you have a lot of you're zoomed out at the end of the day, so don't feel no pressure. But yeah, I guess no one's gonna talk anything right now. So where's this person just missed here? Okay, I got one here. Scott Kennedy, can you hear me, sir? No, I don't think he can hear us. Scott? Yes,
Looks
he's seen
like
a
he might be on
parallel.
the phone.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's just laying back and having a chat with someone else.
Luis,
Anyone else would like to share? Oh, sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
yeah, I can maybe just get started because I'm working on a project that Chris Higgins is involved with, so it's kind of topical. So our office is working on a project called Vienna House, which is in East Vancouver, and it's 123 units of social housing and passive house. It's in for rezoning at the moment, so still have a ways to go, but we're in kind of design development, and Chris has been supporting us from the beginning on the project and continues to do so.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating project. Thanks, Jamie. It's a pretty fascinating project. It's really wonderful to be working with public. There was a lot of interest in the project when we went out to tender. And the project's interesting because it's a collaboration between, well, for a number of reasons, but one, it's a collaboration between the City of Vancouver and Vienna. And Vienna is also they're building a Vancouver house there, which is they're building a similar multifamily building. They're trying to learn from what Vancouver does well, and we're trying to learn from what Vienna does well. Both of them sort of demonstrating excellence insofar as sort of social and environmental attributes. And yeah, it's been really interesting working with Jamie and his team. There's quite a lot of research that goes along with it. So it's been really wonderful. I know Jamie and his team have been working on a piece around shading and a piece around thermal bridging for different balcony designs. That's been really interesting. We're working to publish all the research. We've also recently published a piece of research looking at CO2 heat pumps for domestic hot water and sort of the 3 systems that were available. Yeah, publishing, maybe 80 to 100 pages, but a detailed analysis on them and the best sort of costing data we could get. So it includes Mitsubishi's new offering, as well as Lyric, I think it's called Lyric by Watts or Link by Watts. I can't recall offhand, but both CO2 heat pumps, along with, of course, the Sandin, which I'm sure most people know. And yeah, it's just been a fascinating project to be involved with. It's pursuing Passive House, and it's really nice. Through the selection process, I got to understand a little bit of some of the projects that Public has been involved with. And Jamie, you know more about this than I do, but Public had recently done I think it was a student housing project, maybe for UBC Okanagan. Is that correct?
Yep, that's in Kelowna. That was completed. I think they're in their 2nd academic year being in there, so hopefully they're up to full capacity in the building. I'm not sure, but yeah, that's 18 months ago wrapped up that project.
Nice. Yeah, it was a great project as experience because as many people know on the call, likely better than I, there can be additional challenges when you have a very densely populated building, like student accommodations, pretty modest spaces, high occupant load, and working on an affordable housing project. Certainly wouldn't be quite that high occupancy, but certainly higher occupancy. So lots to learn there. And I think we're in pretty good shape. Do you remember, Jamie, what the preliminary PHPP is looking like for space heating?
I can't remember a number, but it's below 10.
Yeah, I
so
remember.
there's a lot of room in there, but there's also a lot of input still to land in it. So early signs are good, but there's a lot of detail to be worked into it.
Fair.
Are you guys planning to get to collect information to be shared in the future? Is this going to be something that we're gonna, like getting the CO2 levels, energy consumption, the whole thing right after the completion of construction?
Yeah, Jamie could maybe elaborate more. I mean, one of the things that I'm excited about as well is we're doing pre and post collection of PM10, I believe. It's like the size of pollutant particle as well as black carbon. So pre and post. It's not on like a incredibly busy street like 12th, but it is on a reasonably busy street, and it's where the SkyTrain, which is our mass transit system, where it curves. So we're wondering if there'll be any particles from the burn on the corner there. So that'll be interesting to see, like pre-development, and then inside the building post-development. So we'll be able to really assess the functionality of the MERV 13 filters and how well they're improving the outcomes. And there's a question there from Scott Kennedy. I'd be interested in the form factor of the project given the courtyard approach, and I'll let Jamie take that, of course.
Yeah, we were mindful of that in selecting the scheme. So I think because we've got 6 stories of really pure stacking, which hopefully will remain so through the rezoning process, we were actually able to keep to about, I think it's less than 2 as a envelope area to TFA, like maybe 1.8, which was better than we thought. I think you do one big move of hollowing out the building, and then after that you hold on for dear life to all the straight walls that you have in sections. So I think it's really learning from lots of other projects and taking a really clear look at the really hot summers that we're getting, and being really honest with ourselves about when there are major acoustic issues, how's the building going to perform with and without windows open, windows closed. SkyTrain is every 90 seconds and it's 80 decibels. It's a kind of a compromised site acoustically. So, start with that knowledge at the very beginning that this is, there are some challenges not to be ignored, and try to do the best you can.
And so Jamie could elaborate more, but one of the goals with the courtyard, which was debated, it was a wonderful debate, but one of the goals with the courtyard is every unit will be able to open a window away from the SkyTrain. So which wouldn't have been possible without the courtyard design, I believe. Is that correct, Jamie?
Yeah, I think we were going to be looking at, with a conventional double loaded corridor, you would have sort of 40% of the units would have a single aspect only to the SkyTrain line, and then also the south facing units, which are most vulnerable to overheating, would also have just a single aspect. So in our case, there are southwest facing units that are naturally more vulnerable to overheating. So those are ones which are most easily able to keep windows open while asleep at nighttime to the courtyard. So it's kind of trying to mediate between winter and summer conditions with Passive House. And sometimes I think the desire to go for absolute minimum form factor can deliver summer conditions. You think it's going to be the most economical way to build a Passive House project, but it can create summer conditions which require significant mechanical cooling. So then you're kind of chasing compactness for winter conditions so far that you're maybe forcing in overheating issues and some additional mechanical expense potentially by not finding a good summer to winter balance, and working with real current and future climate files.
Thank you, Jamie, for the explanation. Before, Sean, you had your hand up for quite some time, buddy.
No worries. I just want to give Jamie a shout out. He'll be on the accelerator in a couple weeks talking about the Skeena and So if you can attend it, hopefully we can get Jamie out to a Passive House Pulse event and he can reiterate that presentation. So thanks, Jamie, for volunteering your time and all your work you did on that particular project.
Sure. Thanks, Sean.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. That's great news. Scott, you have your hand up, sir.
Well, I thought it'd be easier to unmute. I was on the city's website and actually exploring your project because I saw the development permit documents go in. And you were talking a lot about, I believe, panelizing and prefabricating the building. Funny enough, I ended up on somebody called Public that makes panels in the US for passive houses. And I ended up in some seminar with them last week and they didn't know what I was talking about. Neither did I.
I've never heard of them, actually.
They make very rigid panels. Like they have about, 15 types of panels. It's either take them or leave them.
Okay.
And but it's like passive house type stuff. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I'll tell you what I was really trying to get at is I want to know what your mechanical system is, because to me, ventilation is 90% of the architectural problem in these buildings. And I'm really interested in what you're saying there.
Yeah, so it's centralized because of the building being in the form it's in. It's two HRVs, although I'm not certain that they're not ERVs, but I'll say HRVs for now. We're trying to locate them in the basement to get access to the coolest outdoor air that we can so that they're not located on the roof. Scott, you're probably aware of, by distributing vertically then into the suites, because we don't have hallways to run horizontal distribution, then you're into the smoke and fire damper issue that's kind of arisen. So we're trying to work our way, that's a new code kind of thing since the last
So
3 years.
there's an alternative solution prepared by Sinez for BC Housing.
Yeah.
And the City of Vancouver, in fact, I've done it twice this week. The City of Vancouver allows us to get a letter from the mechanical engineer that explains that the two air sources don't mix and that the unit will carry on running during a fire alarm event. A couple other little details in there.
Yeah.
And then they're allowing them, it's not even an alternative solution, which I found surprising. It's just a letter from the engineers. Now, I've been told that by a couple of CPs. We'll see how it goes because we haven't quite got the permits yet.
And is that, I think when I looked at that alternative solution, that's dependent on ventilation equipment on the roof.
Could be.
So
Could
that's
be.
why we're kind of starting at that point. We're trying to take it a little bit further to locate them in the basement, which has got its own challenges because, there's a lot of bike parking and car spaces to accommodate down there, but there's big performance benefits to keeping them in the building, simplifying the roof detailing and so on. So I think the two possible situations are that we provide a backup for the HRVs so that they're able to keep, you can kind of drive the stack effect in the event of a power outage. And then there's another route, which is, I'm struggling to describe it, but there's essentially a small amount of ductwork that could run at the ceiling and it will allow, I'm not a mechanical consultant, so I'm trying to remember exactly, but essentially we're investing in two routes and we'd like to not have a generator in, but it's a tricky one. So, and then the cooling system is just on the ventilation air. So there's pre-cooling. I think it's a little bit similar to what the project up in Pemberton that the Innovation Building Group did, Rod Nadeau's company.
Yeah.
So it's a similar kind of approach, but it's dependent on really aggressive window shading, cross ventilation, and mechanical cooling that's, a couple of degrees above the set point. Kind of, when you get to 26, 27 degree indoor air, windows get closed and it'll maybe provide like 23, 24 degree air to the suites. So it's a kind of a all of the above solution to try and tackle it. A little bit of active cooling and a lot of passive measures.
In terms of the ventilation rate, we're having all kinds of discussion with PHI about whether we have to run continuous high or whether we can ramp these units up and down. And right now they're saying we got to ventilate at the high rate all the time. And it causes a big issue. Are you putting any individual bit damper control into any of the suites?
That's what I've heard. and we were talking about this yesterday. So we're kind of at the stage of, we're still trying to locate our mechanical equipment, roof or basement. So yeah, what I've heard is that we're going to try and do individual dampers on them. And I think it's the swag-on units that I think you can work that into the system. But yeah, that's kind of what we're reviewing at the moment. The courtyard typology kind of forces your hand a little bit on some of these issues, you know, there's also electrical distribution that we're trying to do vertically rather than horizontally, to avoid, you know, taking up quite a small, you know, available surface area inside the courtyard that you want to keep for openable windows and building faces and not have electrical closets and things spread out across it. So
lots of challenges.
Yeah, it's funny. The Vienna team are doing. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just, when you talk about it, it's what about your water circulation, right? Because are you going to go vertical on your recirc lines, or how are you going to collect your recirc?
I don't know. I can tell you that it's probably going to be the Sandon system gang together, a lot of them. So I think they needed 8 or 9 of them for that project in Pemberton. So we'll probably end up with 1.5 to 2 times that amount on a big series of skids on the roof. And there's a big focus on resiliency so that there's positive feed in a power outage. So that's why the water tanks are on the roof. But about the recirc lines, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, we're going the opposite. We're putting the Sandons in the parkade and putting the heat pumps and everything for ventilation on the roof. Typically, that's what we've been doing.
And the condensing units for the Sandon close to the tanks then in the parkade.
Sitting in the parkade, yeah. Right? Yeah. So I've got a bunch of projects we're using Sandons on, and in fact, I have some doubting engineers. I got to twist their arm tomorrow, but it's we're using, I don't know, a bank of 2 banks of 14, 1 bank of 18, and a bank of 6. So 4 different systems for 4 buildings on 1 parkade. So, but I love the Sandons. I think they're fantastic because if one goes out, big deal. But it's your recirc. I'm curious about your recirc, because are you recircing in the parkade, which is cold? Or where? How are you going to do your recirc? That's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
One of the things, and Jamie can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my recollection, the parkade is very modest, like in terms of the amount of space it takes up. And I would refer to it, and it might be technically incorrect, but I would refer to it as largely above grade. Is that so? A slope site, right? And
yeah,
I don't think there's any ramp down to drive into the parking garage.
Yeah, I had to look at it. It doesn't.
Yeah, it's kind of straight in from the low side of the site. So there's a lot of competition for space down there, because you know there's a big saving by not going any lower and keeping it all above grade. It's kind of a relatively simple foundation, but there's a lot of things fighting for space. Funnily enough, I guess in 2022, the number of actual car parking spaces is probably more flexible than bike parking, and you know we have a fairly modest amount of parking anyway, so it's good to see that that's, you know, not the thing that's driving the design. The private vehicle spacing is now taking a kind of a backseat in the discussion.
I live about 6 or 8 blocks from there, so I'll be watching closely.
Yeah, and the site constraints have really driven us to prefab as well. So it's kind of nice that like there are challenges with the site that kind of make you try innovative approaches. So there's a lot of kind of good things that come from having a really confined problem to solve.
So what is your wall panel?
At the moment, it's essentially close to like a BC Pacify style. It's a big, like a 2x10 with a service wall, or it could be 2x10 with extra exterior insulation and just a kind of 2x4 on side surface cavity. But at the moment, it's kind of basically the BC Pacify standard wall and then CLT floors.
Gentlemen, I'm gonna have to interrupt just to be
Sure.
mindful of time. But Jamie, as this meeting has been recorded, I'd like to invite you to our next post. I will send you an email, but the invitation is already done. So You pretty much have to say yes or no by the end of this meeting. I'm just kidding, but I'll send you the invitation for you to be our next guest speaker and do talk about this project, which it's going to be very, very interesting, you know, and it's gonna raise a lot of new technicalities, and we can notice that you're already having to face some difficulties, and you know, having to work around some problems. So sharing this with the community would make a lot of sense, so we avoid for the next projects and we learn from your own experiences. So if you'd like to join us, the invitation has been done, so it's up to you now, my friend, to join us for the next Vancouver Pulse.
Sure. Thanks, Luis.
Thank you, Jamie. So right now, joining us this evening is our guest speaker. You for sure know this guy before, Chris Higgins, Senior Green Building Planner for the City of Vancouver. We'll be discussing how to transform the built environment by addressing what Vancouver has done over the past 10 to 15 years to transform new construction to achieve zero emission outcomes. Chris, it's a pleasure having you. It's a pleasure seeing you here once again, and please take it on. Thank you very much, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Luis. Do we want to do questions at the end of the presentation? Is that how you'd prefer to do it?
Yes, I mean, like if I'd like to, it just to keep the flow for the presentation, people can raise their hand or put the questions in a chat, whatever works best for everyone, and for yourself, of course, whatever you think it's best, we can do it.
Okay, great. Can you see the presentation full screen now? Great, excellent.
Yeah.
So good evening. My name is Chris Higgins and I work with the City of Vancouver, and tonight I'm going to talk a bit about how the city has leveraged Passive House as a standard to improve the built environment as a whole. One question that I have gotten before is how is everyone going to build a passive house? And part of my role with the city is I go out with inspectors when there are problems or challenges that are energy related and try to find solutions. And recently I was out on a site where there was a builder who was a homeowner builder, so he was not experienced. And he had a brand new house that he was trying to get down. We have a 3.5 ACH at 50 Pascal requirement, and he was up over 8 and trying to sort of wrench it down to get to 3.5. And after 4 weeks and 4 air tightness tests and 4 iterations of his trades being in trying to achieve better outcomes, we got to 4.06, and we call that good enough. So I guess kind of one of the overarching themes you'll kind of recognize in my presentation is we leverage Passive House as a standard to rapidly allow us to transform the built environment, but we're not expecting everyone to be able to build a passive house. And I think that's a good thing for the reputation of Passive House. There are many excellent builders and many excellent designers and architects and engineers. And then there's also a spectrum of builders, designers, and other professionals. So with that, I'll take it away. I'll talk a little bit about myself. So I'm a senior green building planner. I'm focused on low-rise residential. So if you have questions about low-rise residential, 3-story, multifamily, all single family, I'm happy to answer those questions. About 70% of all residential square footage built in the city of Vancouver over the last 4 years was 3 stories and under, and purely residential. A lot of single family, although we've seen a shift towards more duplexes, largely probably because Vancouver is a challenging city affordability wise, and the city's recently started allowing more duplexes to be built, and hopefully we'll continue to see that the density kind of increase. My focus, I've been with the city for 8 years. My focus has been 100% on new buildings until last year. And now I'm split 50-50 on new buildings and existing. I'll talk a little bit about why that is. So as an individual, I'll take on lost causes for passive houses. So if you're pursuing passive house and think the city will never make it happen, let me know and I'll see if I can assist. I was pretty happy there was a project, small project triplex that was an architect wanted to build, and the city would only allow them to build a duplex. And after talking to various city staff and kind of running around the halls of City Hall campus, got the director of planning at the time to consider it an orphan site and allow them to build a triplex. And so they're now in for building permit, which is really great because it's a single family site today, and will become now a triplex that'll be passive house. It's got a beautiful view of the little park, and yeah, really great to see that move ahead. Yeah, and so I've been successful in helping a few different projects, whether it's in going to Board of Variance or more often encouraging and trying to help the Director of Planning or whoever has Director of Planning authority to see the value of a project and why they may want to use their discretion to allow that project to proceed. I also like to kind of be planting and harvesting. So in my work, I develop policy, which sort of affects all projects in the city and building code. But at the same time, I like to be thinking about what's next. So like, for example, one of the things I don't cover in my presentation is a procurement we actually have out right now, where we're looking for a partner to run an embodied carbon incentive program, where we provide thousands of dollars to low-rise residential projects that can demonstrate a carbon reduction somewhere in the range of 20 to 80%. And so we're looking to launch that later this year. So that's kind of like a future piece. And so I try to split my time between kind of broader policy development and then and programs as well as reductions today. And one of the reasons why I love Passive House is it's a proven solution. I think one thing that I've observed, so prior to working with the city, I worked for 7 years with the Canada Green Building Council. And prior to that, I worked for 7 years with Mountain Equipment Co-op when it was a cooperative. I finished my time there as their store planner. People often want to come up with their own way to achieve something and their own sort of mini standard. And this is kind of good enough. And there's always inherently, there's a lot of challenges. I worked when I worked at the Canada Green Building Council, I worked on developing a standard, augmenting a US standard. The standard was called Lead Canada for Homes, and it was quite an intensive process over a long period of time. And to have a standard like Passive House, which has been developed over such a long period of time, be able to apply it directly to achieve council's goals around climate change is pretty wonderful. So a little bit of what I do, my sort of day to day. So I update the Vancouver building bylaw for energy efficiency and to address climate change. So as a city, Vancouver has its own building bylaw. We're similar to Halifax, although Halifax largely doesn't exercise their authority. They require doorknobs that are easier to open, not the knob style, but the lever style. So they did adopt that from Vancouver, which is great. But largely, other than that, they don't exercise that authority. Whitehorse, shout out to Whitehorse. Vancouver has definitely borrowed many of your great ideas. So our building code in Vancouver has a lot of similarities to Whitehorse, and Whitehorse did it first. Whitehorse is a little bit colder than Vancouver, and it's a little bit smaller, but yeah, ideas know no bounds. So we've definitely borrowed some good ideas from there. So often when people say, well, Vancouver did it, but it can't work elsewhere. Well, I mean, our ideas came from Whitehorse. So if you're colder than Whitehorse, yeah, maybe we need to modify the ideas, but insulation and improved building envelopes, fairly universal, at least in the Canadian climate, the climate range. I also develop programs to incentivize better performing buildings. So many of you may know the Near Zero program that I ran with Passive House Canada and Zebex, which we incentivized Passive House low-rise projects, very successful. I'm hoping to repeat that success on embodied carbon. On request, I also visit individual homes and buildings in Vancouver when people want to remove fossil fuel infrastructure and electrify. Mostly it's single family homes and mostly with cold climate heat pumps. But I've been very successful in assisting projects in locating condensers. Vancouver's kind of a pain in the butt sometimes. And so to locate a condenser can be challenging, and I get to work with some really smart people that have the authority, and I get to make the case on why we should allow condensers in specific areas. And it helps me because then when we're developing a policy, I have an understanding of how it's applied. I've also gone through the process personally of replacing a furnace with a heat pump and understanding the challenges in Vancouver. I also support the development of Civic building policy, so I'll go into that quite a bit tonight, hopefully not drone on too much about it, but and I support the implementation requirements for affordable housing. So Jamie mentioned it earlier. I'm supporting the Vienna House project, which is wonderful, and it's a research project. And I'm also supporting 5 other projects that are pursuing passive house that are affordable housing, ranging in height from 6 stories to, I think 12 is the tallest. I think there's 2 that are 12 stories. Not all the locations have been announced, but sort of a spectrum of different passive house projects. And I like to joke sometimes, I think at least a third of my role on those projects is to say, yeah, we really have to do passive house, because the question will always come up, can we do FIAS? What about the American standard? Or how about we model it as passive house and then kind of take it from there and value engineer? And the answer is always very clear. You know, we're pursuing passive house, we're pursuing certification. We need to work with certified passive house consultant and designer. I myself am a certified passive house consultant. So that's part of my role there with affordable housing. So this evening's presentation, obviously it's already started, but I work for the City of Vancouver, the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And all my examples are from the City of Vancouver. We're kind of in transition towards more renewable energy. And my presentation is very focused on the built environment. It's a bit of a story. I'll talk about the policy and some projects and how passive house is really allowing us to shape the city to address the climate crisis in the quick time. Relatively speaking, Vancouver is not quick doing things, but relative to our peer cities, quick to address climate change. So if you don't know Vancouver, we're kind of like a thumbs up. We're about 2.6 million, I think, in the last census, population metro area. And then the area that I'm responsible for in terms of energy and climate for low rise, so we're around about 632,000, something like that. So a growing city. I put this slide in because I just wanted to highlight Vancouver, according to Statistics Canada, is the densest city in Canada. And we can certainly argue with the Statistics Canada methodology, but it's a very dense city. Yet if we include single family, laneways, duplexes, row houses, and low rise, that's almost 70%. It's like 69.4% of all residential square footage permitted in a given year, looking at the average of the last 4 years. So if Vancouver is the most dense city in Canada, think about what any other city in Canada can do by addressing low-rise residential and pursuing envelope-focused solutions. Sure, there are challenging buildings. I mean, we have a sugar refinery here. We have a number of we have a precast cement plant. There's industries where there are other emission types, but relatively speaking, addressing low-rise residential has a huge impact in terms of climate reduction. And we have these sort of proven solutions that Passive House puts forward. So tonight I'll talk a little bit about Vancouver's Climate Emergency Action Plan. If you're not familiar, Vancouver has declared a climate emergency. And as a staff, one of the things that's heartening to me is they've backed it up with budget, and they've backed it up with staff. Not as many staff as we like, but the budget is robust, which is great. I always feel like don't look to a city's plans, but look to the city's budget to know their real aspirations. And Vancouver is taking climate change seriously, and we are putting the resources behind achieving it. I'll also talk about how we're using our policy and programs and projects to respond. So the Climate Emergency Action Plan, I won't go into detail on it because that would take the full half hour, but I will talk a little bit about it. And if you want to Google Climate Emergency Action Plan, it can take you to the part of our website with greater detail on the Climate Emergency Action Plan. But yeah, it's really helpful to frame the rest of the conversation with the Climate Emergency Action Plan. One thing that's helpful to understand, in Vancouver, if you look at our greenhouse gas footprint, we want to put it into a rectangle. 57% of our greenhouse gas footprint in the city of Vancouver is natural gas use in buildings, period, full stop. It's like, bam. So when you're talking about solutions and talking about passive house and high performance buildings, it's really clear what we need to address. And most of that 57% is space heating, and then a good chunk is water heating. And then there's some ancillary, of course, cooking, fireplaces, space heaters, outdoor space heaters, etc. But the largest individual piece is heating buildings. And then very secondarily at 37%, we have gas and diesel burned in vehicles. And then following that, there's waste at 4%, all the methane. We capture about 70% of it, but the methane produced at our landfill, operating our landfills. And 3% is the remainder amount in electricity and our neighborhood energy utility. So just to give some context. So, I mean, we have made some progress over the last year, a few years. 2007 is our baseline year. So we have made some progress looking towards 2020 or back towards 2020, the last full year I have figures for. So we have made some progress, but the Climate Emergency Action Plan is needed to get us close to our 2030 Paris target and 1.5 Celsius. And when we combine the municipal actions of the Climate Emergency Action Plan along with Clean BC, the average outcome of those two plans will get us to our 1.5 Celsius. So we're working towards that. And we've certainly greatly stepped up our actions on buildings. One thing I'll cover later is in low-rise residential, we no longer allow fossil fuels for space heating and hot water to be installed in new buildings. So whether it's non-renewable fossil fuels or renewable gas, they're not allowed in new construction, low-rise residential anyway. So the climate emergency, again, I won't go into great detail here, but I'll just touch on the big moves. It's broken into 6 big moves. The first one is complete walkable neighborhoods, which falls under Vancouver plan. The next 4 fall under the Climate Emergency Action Plan, which I'm involved in. Active transportation and transit is one. Zero emissions vehicles is another. Vancouver recently purchased a bookmobile, electric book truck that travels from library to library delivering books. Pretty ideal in terms of emissions and function. One of the great things about the Vancouver fleet is most of our vehicles return to a yard at night for charging, and they have pretty predictable routes. We also have an electric fire truck on order, the second, I think, in North America, and it's going to go to the West End Fire Hall. Not only is it electric, but all 4 wheels can turn, so it can, and it's a smaller unit, so it can actually access some of the tighter areas in the West End. And my hope in the long term is we'll be able to design streets around a smaller emergency vehicle as opposed to what we do today. But zero emissions vehicles, also our fleet of garbage trucks. We have a number of electric garbage trucks on order. They're also kind of an ideal vehicle because they drive a prescribed route every day. Oh, last thing I should just mention is the electric fire truck has a range extender. So even though in testing in 99.6% of the time it never had to deplete its battery, it does have a range extender in case there's an extended mission, I guess. Then mostly what I'm talking about tonight falls under big move 4, which is zero emission space and water heating. That's really a big focus, and to be honest, it's the majority of my time. I spend a little bit of time, and it's quite interesting, sort of planting the seed for the future, looking at low carbon materials and construction practices. Because we have our own building code as a city, the question that sort of sits in my mind is how can we require better materials, and how can we disallow some of the worst materials from a climate point of view. The last one, which I have almost no insight into, but we have staff biologists and planner that are working on restored coasts and forests, and we're working with First Nations there. I have the least understanding of that, but I think there's an opportunity there for some sequestering of carbon. So, now I'll jump into sort of some of the policy, give an overview. Many of you may know some of our policies, but I'll jump into a bit of an overview of those. But before I do, I'll sort of talk about the overarching approach. So as a city, we want to use our Passive House Civic policy, so our policy for our own buildings, to demonstrate what is possible. So 3 years ago, Vancouver City Hall retrofitted half a dozen boilers and replaced with a couple of very large heat pumps, demonstrating that it is possible. You can transition older buildings off of gas. Now we're trying to use the new buildings that we're building, being built to Passive House, to demonstrate what's possible and create more market demand. We're also trying to support the passive house industry. So I'll go into that a little bit, where we're using floor space to create local demand, and then also encouraging local manufacturers. From 2014 to 2019, I presented every year at the Fenstration BC annual conference, and every year I had a slide on, here are the number of companies that manufacture passive house windows, here are the number of passive house projects we have inquiries at the city. So it was really clear, and it was wonderful, because every year I could say, well, there's one, now there's two, now there's three, now there's four, now there's five, now there's six. And so it was just really great. You could see the competition. You could see, oh wow, I compete with him. Well, if he can invest, or she can invest in developing a passive house window, then we should do it as well. And it was a really great about face in terms of some companies that produced more modestly performing products that now have passive house lines, and now we have that market supply. And then the last piece, I mean, what is this all about? Well, certainly bringing more passive house projects on their own is helpful, but it's also helpful to demonstrate what's possible. And then if we set a high bar for what's possible, when we get to implementing the code, we can go further than we would have been able to otherwise. Because we can say, well, look at all these builders and developers and architects and engineers, and they're doing this. We're only asking you to do this. And they're like, okay, well, that's not so bad. So that's been quite helpful. In the recent published building bylaw changes, we've eliminated fossil fuel for space heating and hot water, and I don't think that would have been possible without all of the market development by passive house projects. So recognizing I have 11 minutes left, I'm going to continue. This Vancouver's Civic buildings policy. So for our own buildings, these are city-owned new construction and major retrofit, we want to achieve a near zero greenhouse gas emissions in alignment with the city's zero emissions building plan and climate emergency response plan. It's a bit wordy, but I decided just to drop it all in. So what does that mean? Well, two things, at least. It means all capital funded projects must complete a whole building life cycle assessment study and identify opportunities to reduce their embodied carbon by 40% compared to a baseline. And second, all capital funded buildings must be designed and certified to the Passive House Energy Performance Standard, that's PHI standard, and use only low carbon fuel sources. So that's generally electricity. The only exception is for backup power in order to minimize energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. And then if we're looking at buildings or uses that are not certified, unheated buildings, for instance, or outdoor pools, for example, they must be designed not to use fossil fuels. So that's been a well-received policy, and we have some really wonderful champions within the city on Passive House. One of the really great things that happened early on in the city is we were training and building inspectors on Passive House, and one of the first inspectors that got trained got promoted to the head of building inspections. So it was just really great to sort of demonstrate you can learn about Passive House and get ahead in the city of Vancouver. So that was really helpful. Inspired many other inspectors to really want to take the course. And although the city of North Van jokes that they have a higher percentage because they have 2 inspectors and they have one of them trained, so they've got up to 50%. You know, we have over 20 inspectors, and we're darn close to 50% of them Passive House trained now. And if you are on a Passive House project and you want to request a Passive House inspector, you get a Passive House inspector regardless of what geographic area you're in. So you have someone that comes and they're understanding what you're trying to do. So that's been quite helpful. I thought I'd go through a couple of projects. When we decided that we were going to pursue Passive House for our civic buildings, the very first building that was up for design and construction was Fire Hall 17. And when we brought up Passive House, said we're going to pursue Passive House, the first response was, well, can we do it on the next one? Because this one's really hard. And there was we said, no, like we have to do all buildings to Passive House. You can't just pick the easy ones. And they said, okay, we'll go to Passive House on this project. And the whole team really embraced it. It was just this one is a challenging one, both because it's a fire hall, but also because it has a commercial laundry for a dozen other fire halls. I guess they have to wash the garments with a special liquid to retain the fireproof nature. So there's an unusual energy use there. And it also has a small data center. So an unusual energy use there. One of the things that I really appreciated about the design is it harvests waste heat from the data center to heat the potable water for the laundry and the showers and the equipment wash. So it's just this really great harvesting of the waste heat, because the data center runs 24/7, 365. It's just always producing heat, and this was an opportunity to harvest this lovely rich heat source. It was also interesting, the sort of clear piece you see in this model here, that's an equipment bay. And so one of the challenges was determining the appropriate air tightness standard, and we worked with Passive House International in Darmstadt to determine that. So it's been a really great first project, a difficult first project for Passive House for us. This is what it's supposed to look like in terms of the rendering when it's done. And it is coming along. I went by in the summer passed, so I should go by more recently. They're getting close now, but it is coming together quite nicely. And they're on track to hit Passive House certification, which is great. And it's a fossil fuel free building. One of the interesting things for me is the building itself. And if I go back, you can see this little like parking apron here. And that's where all the geothermal is. So we have a geo wells that are there, and that was the only place the geo could go. And if we didn't build a Passive House, there wouldn't have been enough space to drill cost-effective wells to a cost-effective depth. There's a really fascinating presentation. If you haven't gotten it, maybe it's an idea for a future Pulse, but Integral does a really great job. Scott Gomeshi from Integral talking about sort of how Passive House allowed us to go geothermal on this project, and because of the high load for equipment drying, it was quite useful. Got about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. So it's more pictures of Fire Hall 17 under construction. Also childcare. So the next two after Fire Hall 17 were childcare, which is super easy because you have all these heaters that arrive every morning. Really lovely, a simple building. One of the things that really inspired me from a civic effective policy and effective implementation is this is downtown. Downtown land is very expensive. This is an existing parking garage that the City of Vancouver owns. Well, in Vancouver, it rains a lot. So let's say you've got 8 stories of parking. Well, where's your least productive, least revenue positive area? Well, it's the top floor, because if you're paying for parking, you want to be dry. So no one wanted to park on the top floor, and we had really low revenues, very underutilized. So we were able to utilize that space to build these 2 Passive House certified daycares. So that was a pretty great piece. The tender has been awarded for the Cole Harbour School and Housing Project. So replacing a surface parking lot, pursuing Passive House for this school, which will then turn over to Vancouver School Board and demonstrate that Passive House is possible for a school. Vienna House, I won't touch on that because we've talked about that quite a bit. But yeah, great project to be involved with. 825 Pacific, you can Google it to learn a little bit more, but this was turned over to the City of Vancouver by a developer who built it. It's an arts space. So it's an arts space certified to Passive House. And yeah, pretty phenomenal facility, but just quite a variety of Passive House buildings. Coming up next is a nursery, so a tree nursery admin building, Coliseum admin building at the Pacific National Exhibition, and then sort of whatever is next. So we're pursuing Passive House in every building. So the next building that comes along will be Passive House. So what are we doing in the private realm? So what are we doing to encourage Passive House? And there's many leaders on the call here today that will be familiar with this, but we give a 5% floor area bonus for multifamily Passive House buildings. That's been really well received by the local industry. We also have a single family and duplex incentive, 16% for one family, 18% for 2 family. And when I talk to single family and duplex project teams, they're really like appreciative, and this works, and this makes the economics of Passive House work for their project. And owners must pursue Passive House or equivalent. So far, we've had a couple of inquiries about CHPA's net zero standard, which we've accepted on a trial basis for a few projects, but mostly Passive House. I also ran a net zero case study program, which provided up to $25,000 per home. The program is now complete, and now we're looking at launching a similar program for embodied emissions, which will likely have some bonus money if you're pursuing Passive House. So what does this all lead to? Well, it leads to building code changes. It leads to the city being able to move up the minimum bar. So for low-rise residential, as of January 1st, the City of Vancouver no longer allows gas or oil for space heating or hot water in most cases. We have an exception because we have an agreement with Fortis, our gas utility, that we must continue to allow a path for gas. So our path for gas is if you build a passive house, you can use gas for space heat and hot water. So there's our path. The performance path that we have also, maybe in some limited cases, might allow someone that really wants gas for domestic hot water. They might be able to squeak it in some limited cases. What does it look like in terms of energy use reduction for a typical single family home? Well, going in 2006, before Vancouver really exercised its building bylaw for low-rise residential, we're around 20,000 kilowatt hours annually used. Going to 2019, we're down to 7,000, which is pretty good. But now in 2022, we're down to around 1,900 kilowatt hours for space heating. So some pretty great progress there. To look at it in emissions, going from 5.4 tons in 2006 to 2.8 in 2019, so still using gas. Now electrifying space heating and hot water, we're getting down to 0.8. So a pretty significant improvement. And Vancouver tears down somewhere around 600 houses, 600 to 1,000 houses a year and rebuilds them. So a pretty significant number. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of, I developed was an overall limit for the property for large homes. So if your home's over 325 square meters, there's a greenhouse gas limit that covers the entire property. So if it's a larger property, you have a pool, you have a conservatory, you have a heated basketball court, you have a heated driveway, you have to meet a 2-ton limit. That includes your pool. So that's been really effective at decarbonizing a lot of its sort of ancillary uses. Last couple of slides. So Vancouver's carbon pollution, we made some progress to 2020, but if you look at where we need to get to in terms of negative emissions, a lot of what I've talked about tonight is getting us to the 50%. We have a much bigger lift to get us to carbon neutral and then to negative emissions beyond 2050. But everything I've seen, we're developing policy to get us to 50% by 2030. And the climate emergency has really provided the support needed to get us there. I do have one ask, and I can drop it into the chat after. But if you can fill out we have a short sort of guided feedback form. Vancouver's proposing regulations for existing houses, where large houses would have to use either electric space heating using a heat pump or renewable natural gas. And then all homes, when they replace their heating, their hot water system, they would need to either shift to electric, either heat pump or electric resistance, or they would need to shift to renewable gas use. And if you could fill out the survey, that would be helpful. We are going to council in May. So far, support from the public and from industry has been good, but I don't have enough time to go into greater detail there, but it is a time of replacement requirement, so no one has to take action until their equipment fails. So we're certainly consulting with industry. And that's a half hour, so I just say thank you very much. If you're on Twitter, happy to follow you there. Please don't email me. I have a lot, like everyone, I get too many emails, and so it's not a great way to reach out to me, but yeah, reach out to me on Twitter. I find it feels less like work when I check Twitter outside of work hours. And thanks very much to everyone on the call. I mean, Vancouver couldn't do what it does, and I couldn't stand up here and talk about what Vancouver's doing if you all weren't doing leading work. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Louise.
Chris, wow, man, just amazing. Wow, it's great to have you here with us. Just want to thank you for the amazing presentation. It's great to see, you know, how Vancouver has been leading, you know, towards net zero and perhaps at negative emissions for the foreseen future as well. I mean, like I'm overwhelmed, even though I'm kind of a read what Vancouver is doing, like pretty much on a daily basis. But it's just great. I mean, like as you said, it's a work that the city does, but we have professionals actually, you know, be willing to do it and study and share information. So thank you for that. Right now, the thing is, the floor is open for questions. If you'd like to raise your hand and ask the question yourselves, we do appreciate, instead of myself just reading, and it's just going to be, we just want to make this a little bit more of a conversation, as if we were in person. So if you want to mute yourself, Laura, I see you muted yourself. If you want to take the first question, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my first question is how the City of Vancouver is planning to address the issue of cooling or adding heat pumps into existing buildings. I live in a strata, it's made of wood, all wood frame, everything is, I don't know what we can do to achieve avoiding the use of fossil fuels and implementing our homes for the next heat waves or heat dome that are coming to Vancouver, because it's a reality. So I am part of the Strata committee here, and so many owners keep asking how we can address the issue, because most of the owners in here are seniors. So some seniors during that heat wave move out of their units just to hotels, just to keep it cool and don't get heat strokes. So my question is how the city is planning to help already, you know, all these people that we don't have the opportunity to implement the heat pump systems into our buildings. That's all.
Great question. Thank you. So one piece of policy that I'm working on right now focuses on electrifying and adding heat pumps. And specifically, it's focused on 1 and 2 family homes. So it's not focused on multifamily, but I think the work is applicable there. So we have partnered with the province through Clean BC, as well as BC Hydro. We're presently providing for 1 and 2 family homes. We're providing up to $12,000 in a rebate. There are multifamily rebates as well. I don't know them as well, but they're also providing financial assistance. I know that the province is about to launch, next week or the week after, a program targeting low and moderate income households as well, where they'll cover 95 to 60% of the upfront cost. So if you're spending $10,000, you pay between $500 out of pocket for low income, or moderate income, you would pay $4,000 out of pocket. So there's quite a bit of assistance coming from the province in terms of adding a heat pump and electrifying. I personally have electrified a rental that I have, and the tenants certainly were quite thankful in the last heat wave. And then I'm in the process of electrifying my own home. And so what I can say is for low rise, it works well. I have a coworker who lives in a 6-story building, wood frame, and he's in the process of getting quotes for electrifying his home. So he'll have cooling in his suite come the summer. I'm happy to connect you with some resources maybe after, if that's helpful, if you're interested in electrifying individual units. And then secondarily, I would say, aside from the space heating and cooling, if water heating is of interest, we're currently doing some research with Scott Kennedy and some of his peers on electrification options for water heating as well, using using heat pumps. But your question was largely around cooling, and we are developing both assistance, financial and individuals, to help. And if you're interested to have someone from the city in a non-official way come out to the building, I'm happy to come and bring one of my multifamily peers, so we can look at the sort of the challenge in adding a heat pump and try to assist. Thank you. Does that answer the question? Hopefully.
You are muted, Laura.
Hopefully it answers the
Oh,
question.
thank you very much. We are 95 owners in this strata, and a lot of people are coming, you know, other trades, because they want to make money with us very much. But I told the committee I will do a research and attend the meeting, and that will be great if you can bring some of your team members and your knowledge to address the issue. Thank you.
I'll add one thing that might be helpful, and I'm happy to make an introduction. A woman, Lise, she lives in a stacked townhouse development in Vancouver, an older building, and they recently added 89 heat pumps. So they did a larger procurement to try to bring the cost down, and they went with a very sort of value engineered product by an installer and supplier in Richmond. And so I'm sure she'd be able to share her costs. Her name is Lise, and I could connect you with her and their strata, I guess. But they recently went through that, and there was, you know, lots of process in determining what system they would go with, and then they went through a procurement and got a, I think, quite a good price, given they were buying so many units. But yeah, I think it was 89 units they had in their building that replaced, and I think there's 94 units in total. So not everyone chose to get a heat pump. A couple of people stayed without, but most people did, and they've been quite happy with their solution. So I'm happy to make that introduction. I don't know if Louise could share your contact detail or how that will work, but happy to share that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
very
will
much.
do. Thank you, Laura. Let's go with Scott. You had your hand first up.
Actually, I was going to comment that there are now some units, Innova units, that in fact are an interior solution that doesn't have to go out on a deck and is a fairly unitary thing. Now, it would involve a hole in the outside wall to create a couple of ducts, but if you could find a way to locate them close to a deck where you're really not getting a lot of rain on there, I wouldn't have a lot of problem with, you know, trying to figure out how to do that. But the second thing, Chris and I were having a conversation on the weekend, and Chris was mentioning that in Washington State, I think it was Washington, I think, that there's a program coming that's going to allow hot water to the control of your hot water heater to lie with the utility company. And they're going to be able to then take hot water heating and move it to off-peak hours and give you a lower electricity rate to do that. And I think it's a fascinating idea and a fascinating program, because hot water is essentially a battery, and it's a great way to store energy for use during peak hours and generate it during off-peak hours. And I think that's going to be our biggest issue in Vancouver, in BC really, is that we've got lots of electricity. Our problem's always going to be the peaks, which is typical of most utilities. And I think anything we can do to shift the peaks is kind of important. So maybe that's all I was going to talk about.
Yeah, it's a great point. So yeah, what Scott was talking about, yeah, Washington State and I believe Oregon as well, they have a program there where they're starting to require hot water heating that has a specific port that allows the utility, if the occupier owner is interested, allows them to drop a wireless communication device in there, and then allows them to get a preferential rate in exchange for giving the utility some control. And the program is designed so you have all the hot water you want, but it generates the hot water outside of the peak times. Seems like a great system, seems well suited to heat pump technology. The Sandon, latest version of the Sandon has this specific port. Latest version of the Ream has this specific port, and more and more of the hot water heaters do have this specific port. We had a call with BC Hydro a couple of weeks ago to indicate the City of Vancouver is open to, modify our building bylaw as long as BC Hydro can provide information that there's ample supply of the product. Temporarily, there's a little bit of a supply crunch with so many things right now. I don't know if you heard the 9 o'clock gun in Vancouver is sort of canceled because we can't get the black powder to fire it. And in the same way, there's sort of a bit of a microchip shortage. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to that being resolved and trialing this hot water solution that would allow us to eliminate some peaks.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Scott, for the question. Chris Hill, you're next, my friend. Please.
Thank you. Chris, good presentation as always. Thank you. I've definitely noticed in our business a pickup on the duplexes, and a lot of people really like the bonuses are making a big difference with the 8%. I know that, and so I'm going to put you on the hot seat.
Please.
How long do we have them for?
Oh, yeah. Good question. At least 2025, at least till the end of 2025. Difficult to say beyond that. I mean, I'm a creature of council like civil servants always, but the plan right now, and we're defending that plan, is to the end of 2025. what will happen beyond then? I mean, we'll evaluate it then. I would like to see an extension personally. But yeah, at least till the end of 2025, those incentives will be in place. And we're keen to see greater uptake and feedback if there are challenges. One of the things I think the Passive House community is good at doing is giving feedback and giving us an opportunity to improve. Vancouver's not perfect. We're sort of trying different things. But yeah, to answer your question, Chris Hill, the end of 2025, that's the decision date. We have to make a decision. So realistically, that means in 2024, we have to start thinking about what we're going to do. So there's no immediate change. And I would hope if the city wanted to start to remove the incentive, we would slowly moderate it down as opposed to removing it entirely. That would be very poor policy if we just yanked it all together.
Yanked it off, yeah. I'm sure, like on this goes into a zoning place, but in the place with the multiplexes and different making middle, other policies will probably take over for it, and the less kind of like to an extent character revitalization and that bonus is kind of fading away now, something along those lines.
Yeah,
it's making a difference. I can tell you firsthand.
Awesome.
That it's awesome.
That's great. That's great to hear. We're really nothing warms the heart of a civil servant than to see something you've developed be used. And one of my peers, Shylin Black, he developed a lot of those policies, and yeah, it's just really great to see the industry using it and that it's useful. And yeah, the nice thing about floor space as a city is it doesn't cost us anything, right? We're not giving away tax dollars. We're simply saying, yeah, build to a building that addresses climate change, and you can build it a little bit bigger. And I mean, I've heard many projects say, you know what, this makes an extra bedroom. This is like an extra child's bedroom in this project. So it's like there's a tangible benefit to it. And I mean, we have a housing crisis in the city. So if we're not going to allow people to build more housing and housing that can house more families, I mean, what are we doing here? So glad to hear that. Thank you very much, Chris Hill, for the feedback. It's great.
Thank you, Chris. Now we have one last question here from Stefan. Is there a program in the works to incentivize exterior shading on new and existing buildings to keep the heat out of in the first place?
Great question. So I guess I'll give a two-part answer. I don't know if Jamie is still on the call from public, but one of the research projects that Jamie is doing is Jamie's team. So I don't know if he's doing it specifically. It's just part of his team, but is around solar shading and solar shading devices. So I'll answer the second part, and then maybe I'll turn it over to Jamie to see if he's able to just talk about that research project on solar shading. I know one of his peers, John, is involved in that project and looking at the different solar shading devices that are available in our market. The second part to the answer is, and the short piece is no, that there's not a program to incentivize exterior shading. But one of the challenges that we've run into is in a city, because of climate change that we're experiencing now firsthand, is during the most challenging times heat-wise, exterior shading has less of a positive impact when we're experiencing a heat dome. So we're looking at opportunities not only to encourage better building design, but also to encourage the use of tempered air, so partially air conditioned air. So we haven't looked at incentivizing exterior shading, but if we were to do something, it could perhaps be a learning out of the Vienna House project. One question I guess for you, Stefan, would be like, what would that look like? Would it be a cash program, or would it be floor space, or would it be something else? I'm certainly open to explore it. It's not something we have on the books right now.
I'm not sure what the incentive could look like. It's more like rather than trying to kind of get it dealt with after the fact through equipment, don't even get it there. And
yes, it's a good point. It's a good idea. Jamie, I don't know if you can touch on, and if you can't, it's okay. I know John's more involved in it, but
no, it's actually my thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you.
So yeah, it's a spin-off bit of research from Vienna House, because we noticed that we've had some meetings with people at the City of Vienna, and they do have, I think it's 1,500 euros per dwelling unit retrofit grant for exterior shading. So it's for multi-unit residential only. I think it's specifically targeting existing buildings, and I think it's a cash grant, but that's just part of the investigation that we did. And otherwise we just did a kind of a cast a wide net to try and evaluate all the different shading products that are available, you know, for either individual window shading or for shading a balcony projection, which you see kind of in some locations around the city. And I think, long story short, is that there's a major sort of supply issue unrelated to the pandemic or anything. Just you know, we have access to only kind of a fraction of the range of shading solutions that are available in Europe, and then they tend to have poor local support and sort of be just pretty expensive for similar solutions here, and hopefully that will change. And then also I think we found that there might be some very simple shading solutions that we don't need to have things with, you know, wired, operable, motorized with solar cells to batteries, integrated to building management systems, that if you're planning a project that has an operable window, so like European style, like a single window, fully operable tilt and turn, you should be able to integrate that with, you know, a pretty simple sort of, say, a Spanish style like roller blind that's just manually operated on the outside. And we found, and we have a sample in our office of a product that's, you know, certainly if I was an owner occupier in a single family home and I had a tilt and turn window, or I had a window that you could step out onto a balcony and operate it there, I think it would be a real benefit. And it's just sort of priced per square meter, developed by some architects in Barcelona. And that's it's a very low tech solution, but sometimes I think we kind of overlook, you know, really what is a shade? It's a piece of opaque material that you can move. Like it's, I think sometimes we overthink the issue a little bit and start looking at, you know, adjustable louvers and everything being motorized and different voltages from North America to Europe. And, you know, there are climates in the world where they've been dealing with intense sort of daytime sun, at least for a long time, and they tend to have pretty simple solutions.
Thanks, Jamie. 2 hands up, and we're gonna go for a rep. And Andrew, if you want to go for it first. Vincent, you're next, buddy.
Okay, awesome. Hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm wrong, but it's just my feeling that I hear a lot about like electrifications and incentives on heat pumps, but for me, like they don't go in one line with awareness about energy efficiency and airtightness of buildings, because if you'll just put heat pump in leaky building, it will just create bad reputation for heat pumps and high bills. And yes, and for me, maybe there is some awareness about that, but it's just lower in a few times for me. Like,
yeah, it's a great point. So I guess a couple points to answer. We had a piece of work done just earlier this year after Fortis increased their rates, after natural gas rates went up a little bit, to evaluate the latest generation of heat pumps from Japan and South Korea. And in all cases, the heat pump was able to heat for the same or marginally less, like $6, $8 a year less, using a cold climate heat pump in Vancouver's climate. So that was the first, even in a leaky building. So like, for instance, my home, when I bought it, it was 31 ACH. Now it's 10.5 ACH. So it's still super leaky. My home is going to be torn down by whoever buys it next, because the area that I'm in allows 3 FSR, 3 floor space, and I'm, you know, less than half anyway. So the whole point is my building has like a fixed lifespan, a very modest lifespan, but measured in a single digit. And there are quite a few of those homes in Vancouver. So with the advancement of heat pumps and being able to heat for a similar amount, ignoring the capital cost, because heat pumps do cost more, there's an opportunity to decarbonize existing houses without making them take additional action to lower energy use. I think it's a good idea, and I've taken some steps to lower energy use, adding insulation, making some improvements in airtightness. But through our public consultation, we looked at the idea of requiring people to make air tightness and insulation improvements in their homes. And it was met with what I would call like spirited feedback. People were disliked being told that they had to make an improvement in their home, but they were open to, if the city were to restrict the options for space heating and hot water to renewable sources like a heat pump, they were more open to that idea. But I agree with you, there are some homes that are quite leaky and could lead to bad outcomes in using heat pumps. So we are allowing an option just for existing homes where they could continue to use gas, but they would have to use renewable gas. So it's renewable gas from Fortis. But you're definitely right, Andre. There, ideally a building's reducing energy use at the same time. In my case, we're adding interior storm windows. A company in Oregon called Indo. We're adding interior storm windows, which will greatly lower the energy use because the building is a character and a heritage building or house, not on the register, but has been recommended as a Heritage C. So it has all these single glazed windows. And so there's kind of a limited opportunity for us to improve those. So the interior storm kind of lower the energy use a bit. But I agree with you. In the ideal world, people would be improving the envelope as well. But the sort of balance we've struck is allowing people to have inefficient homes if they desire. So not an ideal solution, but there it is. I hope that helps answer the question, Andre.
Yeah, and I think my idea was mostly not to like give these incentives maybe, or to push them to change the envelopes, but to have maybe some awareness in this news about like heat pumps, that before putting it into your house, maybe you need to just to check your envelope and just to be aware of what type of house you're living in.
Yeah,
in this city.
That's a great point. I developed with the Vancouver Heritage Foundation an incentive program that's been running now for 7 years. It's called the Vancouver Heritage Energy Retrofit Grant. Provides up to $16,000 for retrofitting your pre-1940s home, in addition to any federal or provincial money. And you have an energy advisor that he or she visits your house. They do a blower door test, and they talk about like, here are the improvements you should make. And to me, it's kind of like the gold standard, where it provides you this sort of pick list that you can choose. And hey, here's what you should do on air tightness. Here's what you should do on improving your opaque envelope. Here's your transparent envelope, and then here are your mechanical choices. So it does deliver those outcomes, and we have had really good success there. It's a bit of an expensive program, but the outcomes are really excellent in terms of people installing heat pumps, but only after improving the envelope. So yeah, I agree with you. While we're not able to roll it out to every household in the city, at least not yet, yeah, I agree with you. It's a far better approach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Vincent, please take away.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, I think my question was kind of following up on the discussion about sun shading. So I just have a more general question about kind of, building solutions, design solutions that from what I found when I was working on a passive house with COV, I had a plan checker who was like, well, you're going for outright zoning, so everything's got to be by the book, right? And I'm like, well, this is a passive house. I gotta,
Yeah.
There's new products. So, I had product suppliers recommending like all this fancy new stuff from Europe and stuff. And I'm like, and then I talked to the plan checker. She's like, well, you gotta stick with materials and solutions that are tried and true, CSA tested, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
I find like some consultants who they totally stick to it. Like, it's all Tyvek and whatever, North American stuff. So, but whereas I want to spec, like, for example, Butex or Intello or something, I don't know what the building inspector is going to do. And it's just like certain, details, for example, with sun shading, it's really costly to do, Cascadia clips all over the place, right? Like, if you can save money with a self-supporting kind of structure, that would just be easier on everyone's bank account, like for the client. And it's just, you know, easier to build. However, like the COV bylaw, you can't do that. Any kind of sun shading or overhang has to be attached above, so it cannot be like freestanding supported. So it just makes everything more costly. And even the form of the house is already prescribed, like it's just like boom, and then it's got a wedding cake shape.
Yes.
Like everything's got to be wedding cake, and it's so annoying. And then every house looks the same. So I'm just wondering, like, in the process of, you know, getting your permits, and you're working with the plan checker and the planners, and you want to try new things, but you're designing to outright zoning, like, how flexible and how do we negotiate trying to introduce new solutions? Like whether it's a new material or just a new detail or something like that.
Great question. So one of the things that we've been successful with is offering just the passive house projects a pre-permit meeting. So it's in addition to any application being made. If it's not a passive house project, unfortunately, we haven't been able to offer the pre-permit meeting. But if you're a passive house, single family or duplex, and you want a meeting with Denise, she runs the 1 and 2 family group. She's open to have, I think it's a half-hour or 45-minute meeting to kind of review some of the pieces early to see if they'll run into resistance. And that's been quite helpful in sort of trying to see what can fit or what can work, and not get sort of damaged in the sort of sausage factory that is our permitting system. And I just say that just there's a lot of throughput, right? There's a lot of throughput there, and there's a lot of pressure to go fast. I'm certainly open to help on a sort of like a one-on-one basis, but that pre-permit meeting with Denise is a good opportunity. Secondarily, and the last thing I'll say would just be, if there's interest from Passive House Canada and doing like kind of a research project to show like what are the problems with our outright zoning in terms of allowing better buildings, and you, Vincent, wanted to work with Passive House Canada, the city would be open to fund a small project like that, so we could learn. And I would include Shylin Black. He's an architect on our team. There's a great understanding of zoning and outright and conditional. You know, that would be kind of an ideal thing that I won't speak for him, but perhaps, you know, he could consider taking on in the last half of this year. So if there's interest from Passive House Canada in kind of running a design through and saying like, here are the places where the outright process is not working well, for encouraging better buildings, I'd certainly be open to fund that, Vincent, if it was something Passive House Canada was interested in. Thank you.
Okay, so Denise, as in Denise Westerman?
Yeah, Denise,
Okay.
Denise Westerman, yeah. So I work quite closely with Denise to try and assist Passive House projects. But yeah, Denise Westerman, she heads the 1 and 2 family group with Tony. And yeah, so there's kind of two pieces. One, I can offer individual project help, but maybe a better is to kind of change the structure of the system through that project, potentially with Passive House Canada.
So yeah, it's been a few years. From what I understand is, if I wanted to spec something like, you know, really new, it's not CSA or CAN tested, I would need to provide a letter. And that's where I hit a roadblock, because, you know, the supplier recommended Havelock. I was just like looking into, like, I'm not serious about it, but I was like, well, how do we get the inspectors to approve that? And then, so I think Denise said, you need to submit a letter. And I go back to the supplier, they're like, we're not gonna write a letter, you do that. I'm like, I can't write it. Like,
Yeah.
So it's just like, yeah, I don't know.
That's fair. I have some, I have to see if I can get it right, but so part 5, some projects will pursue part 5 where the professional takes responsibility. I recognize that's a costly method, and some people on the call may have taken that path, but I have seen some projects where they want to use very non-traditional materials, take that path. It is kind of like a long-term goal where I'd love to see more of the newer materials pursuing Canadian certification, but I recognize there's a cost and we're a relatively small market. So the kind of interim step would be this sort of understanding what the challenges are, and then having a staff like Shylin perhaps work on solutions. So I'm certainly happy, if Vincent, if you wanted to follow up with Louis, I'm happy to, fund a project like that and connect you with Charlotte. Could be something we could look at this year.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, side question, not really about Passive House generally, but
Okay.
I think it was this week that the streamlining rental policy was enacted.
Yeah.
And so can you give us insight on like the upscaling or like the upzoning of single detached lots for like apartment buildings?
I'm a terrible person to do that. I contributed a very small part to that work. But yeah, I'm happy to connect you with someone who could. I don't think everyone's gone here. So they're not here now, but I'm happy to connect you. There's a couple of staff that I worked on, and they know that inside out, and they'd be able to answer questions. So I know I didn't email me, but if you do want to email me, I'll connect you with the staff that are super familiar and probably have an FAQ about that. They could answer that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Yep, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. Chris, yes, Passive House would love to do this research program. I'll send you an email after we're done here. Before we wrap, I'm mindful of time. We're already past 3 minutes from our scheduled end time. But I'd like to ask you, first of all, if you could come up with some ideas. I have already invited Jamie for our next Pulse Vancouver. If he's up to it, Jamie, please let me know. I'll send you an email as well as follow-up. And I'd like to let you know that our next Pulse Vancouver will be on March 24th. So please put on your agenda. March 24th is our next one. And before we end today's presentation, Chris Higgins, thank you once again, my friend. Really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the work that you do and everything that you actually do for the community. It's much, much appreciated. I'd like to thank you all as well. SIGA as our event sponsor, and I'd like to thank your presence here with us and for all the community work that you do. And let's keep up with the great work, guys. And you can count on Passive House to Canada to whatever you need. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your evenings.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great evening.